At 2:46 a.m., Arif noticed something was wrong the moment the ICU hallway felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes your breath feel visible even when it ice. He had worked night security at the hospital for 3 years and knew every sound, every flickering light, every false alarm. Yet that night, the CCTV monitor kept pulling his attention back to ICU bed number 7. A bed officially marked vacant for 6 months after its last patient. Imran Kurasi was declared dead from sudden cardiac arrest. At first, Arif thought exhaustion was playing tricks on him when he saw movement on the screen. But then the figure on bed 7 slowly sat up, unnaturally straight, as if pulled by invisible strings. The heart monitor beside the bed showed no pulse, yet the body continued to move. Arif checked the logbook again to be sure. Vacant. Confirmed. Death certificate signed. Burial completed. When he looked back at the screen, the patient was standing beside the bed now. Hospital gown torn at the shoulder, feet touching the floor without making a sound. His head tilted at an angle no living neck could hold. And then the most disturbing part happened. The figure raised its face directly toward the camera, eyes wide open, unblinking, staring with the certainty of someone who knew they were being watched. Arif ran to call the senior guard and dragged him back to the control room, pointing at the monitor with shaking hands. But the moment the senior guard looked, the screen went completely black. No static, no error message, just darkness. They checked the camera system. All feeds were normal except ICU 7, which showed nothing. The senior guard laughed it off and blamed night paranoia before leaving. But when Arif was alone again and turned back to the monitor, the feed returned only for him. The patient was back in bed, lying flat, eyes still open, staring straight into the lens. And beneath the camera timestamp, Arif noticed something new written faintly on the medical board above the bed. Words that were not there before, written in crooked letters that looked scratched rather than written. "You are seeing this because you are next." And as Arif leaned closer to the screen, the figure's lips began to move slowly, silently, forming his name without making a sound, while the ICU hallway behind Arif echoed with the soft, unmistakable noise of footsteps approaching from a direction that no longer had a camera feed at all. From the point where the footsteps began, Arif froze in his chair as the sound grew clearer, slow and deliberate, bare feet slapping faintly against the polished ICU floor. A sound he knew too well because no patient was allowed to walk unassisted in that ward. His eyes stayed locked on the monitor where the figure on bed 7 was no longer moving its lips but smiling now. A stretched, unnatural smile that exposed teeth far too white for a body that was supposed to be buried. The words "you are next" flickered once and vanished from the medical board, replaced by Arif's full name and employee ID number written exactly as it appeared on his security badge. His breathing became shallow as he slowly turned his head toward the glass window separating the control room from the ICU corridor. And through the dim emergency lights he saw it. A silhouette standing just outside the door of ICU. Room 7, motionless, head bent at the same impossible angle as the figure on the screen. When Arif snapped his gaze back to the monitor, the bed was empty, the sheets still warm according to the thermal overlay, and the camera angle began to shift on its own, panning away from the bed and toward the doorway, toward the exact spot where Arif was sitting, as if the camera itself was turning to look at him. His radio crackled suddenly and a distorted voice whispered his name even though the radio was switched off. And in that moment, Arif realized the most horrifying truth of all. The CCTV wasn't showing him a ghost moving through the hospital. It was showing him the delay, the few minutes between when something woke up in ICU 7 and when it reached him. And as the control room lights flickered and the door handle behind him slowly began to turn, Arif understood why no one else could see the footage. Because once the camera shows you, you are no longer just watching the system. You have become part of what it records next. The door handle stopped turning for a moment, as if whatever was on the other side was listening. Arif didn't dare move, because the CCTV monitor suddenly split into multiple feeds on its own, each one showing a different angle of the ICU corridor, even though there were only 2 cameras installed there. And in every feed he could see the same thing slowly getting closer. Bare feet dragging across the floor, leaving no footprints, yet somehow darkening the tiles, as if the light itself was being absorbed. His radio crackled again, and this time it wasn't a whisper but a calm, clinical voice identical to the hospital announcement system, softly saying code blue, "ICU bed 7, over and over again. Arif's eyes darted to the patient file still open on the desk, and he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The death time was no longer 6 months old. It now showed today's date with a time that was still counting down, seconds moving backward toward zero. The monitor beeped sharply and the feed zoomed in on the figure's face as it stepped under the camera light. The skin looked wrong, stretched too tightly over bone. Eyes sunken yet alert. And when it opened its mouth, the voice came out through the speakers around Arif, steady and breathless, explaining in a tone used for medical trainees that death is not a moment, but a process that can be paused, and that some patients never fully leave the ward. They just wait for someone to notice them. The control room temperature dropped so fast Arif could see frost forming on the edges of the screens. And as he tried to stand, his legs refused to respond because the final camera feed switched to a view he knew should not exist. A camera angle from inside the control room itself, positioned behind his chair, showing him sitting there frozen while something tall and thin stood just inches behind him, its head lowering slowly toward his ear. As the voice on the speaker whispered that the ICU only releases one patient at a time in bed. 7 had been empty for far too long. Arif felt the pressure of breath against his ear, though the thing behind him had no lungs. The smell was sterile and rotten at the same time, like disinfectant poured over decay. And the camera feed from inside the control room showed the figure, as shadow merging with his own until it was impossible to tell where Arif ended and it began. The monitor started replaying fragments of old ICU footage out of order. Patients flatlining, nurses running, curtains being pulled. But every face slowly turned toward the camera as if aware they were being watched again. The voice continued calmly explaining that some deaths leave residues in places built to keep people alive. That machines remember rhythms even after hearts stop. The patient board updated itself again, this time listing vital signs that matched Arif's own heart rate displayed on his The figure behind him leaned closer and the camera lens cracked slightly as if reacting to its proximity. And across every monitor the same message appeared in clean hospital font instead of scratched letters. Transfer in progress. While Arif felt his chest tightened in perfect sync with the beeping monitor from ICU 7, realizing the footage was no longer predicting what would happen next, but documenting it in real time. Because the moment the hospital decided a bed was needed, it didn't care whether the body filling it was alive, dead, or still sitting in the control room watching the screen. Not stepping forward but unfolding, joints bending the wrong way as if it had forgotten how a human body was supposed to work. Its face hovered beside his on the screen, and for a split second Arif saw the difference clearly. His skin was warm, flushed, alive, while the other face was pale and still, preserved by something that refused to let it decay. The voice stopped narrating and instead began asking routine admission questions through the speakers in a nurse-esque tone. Name, age, time of onset, while the patient board filled in the answers on its own. Arif's name typed itself letter by letter, his age updated in real time as seconds passed, his condition listed as unresponsive but suitable. He felt something press into his back. Marking him as the subject instead of the watcher. And in the reflection of the darkened monitor, he saw staff moving through the ICU corridor again. Nurses he recognized, doctors he had spoken to hours earlier, all walking past bed 7 without reacting. Because to them, nothing was wrong. The bed was occupied as scheduled. The darkness didn't mean silence, because Aref could still hear the hospital breathing around him, the low hum of ventilators, the distant roll of carts, the soft, rubbery squeak of shoes moving with purpose. And as his vision slowly adjusted, he realized he wasn't unconscious at all, just classified as such. His eyes were open, but no one acknowledged them. Nurses moved around bed 7, adjusting machines that had not been there seconds ago, attaching leads to his chest with practiced detachment, while a monitor above him displayed a flat line that refused to respond to his racing heart. He tried to move his fingers, but the command never reached them, as if the signal was intercepted somewhere between thought and muscle. And above him, the patient board updated again, changing his status from transfer in progress to observation, a word that made his stomach twist, because he understood now that observation didn't mean they were watching him. It meant something was watching through him. The CCTV cameras flickered back on one by one, and he felt it immediately. A pressure behind his eyes, a pulling sensation like his vision was being stretched outward, rooted elsewhere, and suddenly he could see the control room again from above. Empty now, his chair pushed back slightly, his drop torch still lying on the floor exactly where it had fallen earlier, and the realization hit him with a slow, suffocating horror that he was no longer seeing with his own eyes. The hospital had reassigned his perspective, turned him into another feed, another angle, another silent witness, and as a doctor leaned over him murmuring that ICU bed 7 had been inactive for too long and systems degrade when they aren't used, Arif understood the final rule no one ever told him, that hospitals don't just save lives, they balance them. And once a space learns how to hold death, it never truly empties. It just waits for someone who stays long enough, watches closely enough, to be quietly reclassified as necessary equipment. The end came quietly, without screams or sudden darkness, which somehow made it worse, because Arif realized the hospital had no need for drama once a process was complete. Days passed, or maybe minutes. Time stopped behaving normally the moment he was no longer counted as staff. His family came once, according to a nurse who spoke near his bed as if he were furniture, saying the patient showed no brain activity, yet machines insisted on stability. And Arif heard every word but could not respond. His consciousness stretched thin across cables and lenses, learning the rhythm of the building, the way a heart learns a body. He began to notice patterns no human should perceive. How certain rooms stayed colder than others. How beds filled themselves without paperwork during emergencies. How deaths were never mistakes but corrections. And slowly the fear transformed into understanding. Because the thing that had taken Imran Qureshi had not been cruel or angry. It had been efficient. The ICU did not create ghosts. It recycled witnesses. Every hospital needed something to watch the watchers. To notice irregularities machines could not flag. And when Arif's body finally failed weeks later in a way doctors couldn't explain, there was no alarm, no code blue. The monitor simply adjusted, his heart line flattening smoothly as if expected. And the moment his biological functions stopped, clarity arrived, sharper than any thought he'd ever had alive. He was no longer confined to a body, nor was he free. He existed in angles and reflections, in time stumps and infrared overlays, his presence humming softly inside the system like a backup generator. And when a new security guard was hired months later, a young man on his first night shift, who felt uneasy for no clear reason, Arif saw him instantly through the cameras, saw the way his gaze lingered too long on ICU bed 7, which was officially vacant again. The patient board wiped clean, the logs reset, and Arif tried to warn him. He truly did. He pushed static into the screen, nudged the camera angle, caused a flicker that made the guard frown. But the hospital filtered his interference automatically, smoothing it out the way it always did. Because warnings were inefficient, learning required exposure. And at 2:46 a.m. exactly, Arif watched the guard notice movement on the monitor, watched confusion turn into dread. And for the first time since his admission, Arif felt something close to grief. Not because he had died, but because he understood there was no ending in the way humans meant it. Only roles being reassigned, cycles maintaining themselves. And somewhere deep in the hospital's architecture, beyond walls and floors and human intent, ICU bed 7 waited patiently, perfectly clean, perfectly ready. While the cameras adjusted their focus, the system breathed steadily, and Arif accepted the final truth that had taken him too late. That the most disturbing thing about the footage was never the dead man standing up. It was that the hospital had never shown him a ghost at all. It had shown him his replacement.